So we'll start to see people filling in now, our participants. Welcome everybody. And we'll give it a minute because it takes a while for them to all get logged in. Yeah, we still got a ways to go. But we will start promptly. It's slowly loading people in, Brielle.
It's still just us speaking though, correct?
It's still just us speaking, and any of the participants who join, and welcome everybody as you're coming into our webinar, they will, if they have questions, post it in the Q&A or chat and we'll take a look at those, okay? But for the webinar, right now, our microphones are the only mics that will be working.
Yeah, I was just saying to your point, there's a tally going on in the participants. It's on the Zoom, it's up to like 28 now. So
yeah, it will get bigger and bigger as time goes on, but we're gonna get started on time, okay? It's 12:01. So we're recording, correct, Brielle? I see the red light on. So welcome everybody to our quarantine webinar series. This is number 4. Many of you asked us for today's webinar topic, and actually so did I. I'm really excited to be talking with this expert panel about things that will help us sustain and build brands and businesses and what private equity is looking for today. I'm honored to welcome these experts, and I think you'll really enjoy this session. And believe it or not, I learned from them, yes, there is still investing going on. We'll talk a little bit about that too. We'll share our observations on what we're all seeing in terms of brands that are able to grow and weather this pandemic storm, and those that might need a little extra work, and how we'll nurture them along too. And we, and by we I really mean they, will share thoughts on what kinds of prognosticators, indicators for future success they might be looking for, or we should be looking for in building in our business. What are they looking for? What should we be driving toward? Because many of us have been at this for a long time, certainly not our first rodeo, we've been through serious downturns and crises before, tragedies even. I managed a company through 9/11 and the aftermath of that. And there was a lot of uncertainty at that point. I thought that would be the roughest time that I would have to deal with as a business leader. And I will say it's still probably the roughest time, although there's a lot happening now and a lot of uncertainty and ambiguity now. We all have lessons learned from the past and guidance for the future via our personal points of view. You are hearing our personal points of view, but they are seasoned by lots of experience. Panelists, I'm really curious and eager to get started. So I'm going to thank you for being here today. I'm so privileged to have had all of you say yes when I asked you to join. And I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, to talk about the work you're doing today, your current role, and also work you've done in the past. Many of you have been involved in healthcare and CPG business, some of you in other industries. Some of you are managing portfolios now or thinking about a future portfolio that you'll be managing. Some of you have culled portfolios in the past and helped companies do that, and you'll talk about that. Once they've all said hello, we're going to launch a quick poll just to get a sense of who's on the webinar today. And then I'm confident that all of you will walk away with some great nuggets of knowledge and some stories to share with the people with whom you work. And with that, I'm going to ask us to get started. And if I could ask, Robin, could you introduce yourself first? Tell us who you are, what you've done, and a little bit about what you love in the role that you've most recently had.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks for asking. I completed over 60 transactions for J&J, the last of which was the $2.1 billion divestiture of LifeScan to Platinum Equity. This was one of J&J's largest, most complex, and most successful transactions. We closed 83 countries in 18 months, which is a record for a medical device transaction at J&J. And 2 of those countries were closed after the countries were already shut down for COVID-19. So I wanted to go out on a high. I left after the transaction was complete, and I founded my new venture, Sit for Strategy, in May. I loved leading cross-functional remote teams. We had over 1,500 people at one point on the LifeScan team all over the world. I worked with the best and brightest people in the field. So we've been working remote for years, and what's new to some is just old hat for me.
And Robin, we'll talk a little bit about that, because in the transaction business, often remote work is the norm. And it wasn't necessarily the norm in the day-to-day of brand and business management. But it is now, and it's looking like it's going to stay that way for a while. I've had the pleasure of working with Robin on a number of divestitures over the years. I know we'll talk about a couple of specifics as we can share them, and that journey together. Maybe we could go to Pierre, and Pierre, could you tell us a little bit about your background? Also great learning.
Thanks, Lisa. Pierre Fichette. I'm a managing partner for private equity focusing on medical devices, pharma, and consumer health. But started my career in manufacturing for a large multinational called Baxter. And I would say I kind of focused early in my career into integration, acquisition. And I did that across many geographies: Mexico, Malta, Brussels, and Belgium. Kind of led me to marketing, M&A, and GM roles. But I would say change management and leading people through change is typical of acquisition integrations. And the focus on values, focus on the strategy, and certainly creating an exciting vision for those teams and those products and those brands and businesses. So after 20 years of doing that at Baxter, I joined this private equity firm by leading their first portfolio investment as CEO. And so went from the big company to a smaller company working for a private equity firm, which was a firm that was founded by my ex-boss and partners at Baxter. And I went through a first sale. So my company was sold to Novartis. I stayed behind with Novartis for 5 years and a senior global role. And then I left to start another company from scratch, founded by Roundtable for about 5 years. And then it got sold. And then that's when I joined. So I've been on the operating side all my life in different functions: R&D, manufacturing, marketing, M&A, and general management. And now I'm as a partner, I kind of lead those businesses as a chairman of the board and work hard at finding target opportunities. So again, it's great. It's a very fun transition to go from a day-to-day management of a business and trying to find the best CEOs, the best management team, and help them really find the best growth strategies and execute how to maximize their potential.
And we'll probably talk a little bit about how do you find them and what do you look for. And I think on the webinar, we'll see that we have people from the operating side as well as from the investing side, and we'll find that out in a bit. I might ask Todd if you could introduce yourself now. And one of the things that I have admired about Roundtable is the way in which you guide some of your portfolio companies and really take an interest in them. So if you could talk a little bit about that too, that would be great.
Sure. Hi, Lisa, and welcome everybody. It's great to be here. I'm Todd Hutsko. I spent the first 26 years of my career in the commercial function at GlaxoSmithKline, and about every role in sales that you could do. And I was dangerous enough to actually go to marketing for a few years.
Nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that. Some of my best learning. But you know, I had the real opportunity to learn at GSK and figure out where it is I wanted to focus on for the future. And I've had the pleasure to work with Keith at Griffin and Tiffany as after I left GSK, we worked all together on CB Fleet and had probably the best experience I've had commercially ever. And that really swayed me to say, I really love this space of private equity. And what I really like about it is the agility and the change. I love change, and I love just helping people and businesses reach their full potential. And that's how I was able, through a couple of opportunities to do due diligence for Roundtable in a consulting role, to really link up with them. Roundtable's a little bit different than most firms, as they put a lot of commercial people on the business in roles in the company, partner roles in the company, with the objective of being more than capital and really helping operators reach their full potential. So my role is pretty simple. I'm only required to do two things. First thing is, I spend a lot of time with Pierre and the transaction team, looking for platforms, companies that we'd like to make a platform out of, or bolting on existing tuck-ins to our existing portfolio companies. And the other thing I do is I spend a lot of time at the board meetings at the executive level, working alongside the executive teams there, helping them figure out what the opportunities are for their business, helping them execute against it, leveraging my network, any experiences I had and things that they shouldn't do that I learned the hard way. But I've been at Roundtable now for 2.5 years. And again, it's been, this space is just so dynamic, because the real focus that most of the firms are all about is just growing businesses and people to their full potential. And I really enjoy that.
Thanks. And I think a couple of themes already that I'd love us to talk to. One is change management. That's really important to what we all do, and continuing in its importance in leadership of brands and businesses. And Matt, I'm getting an echo now. That's a little bit of a tech difficulty on our standpoint, sorry. And Keith, I know just from having recently met you and talking to you, curiosity feels like a really important part of what we're all doing. Asking great questions. And I met you because you asked some great questions about an industry I knew about. Can you talk a little bit about Griffin and your company and your role?
Absolutely. Thanks, Lisa. So I'm Keith Stimpson. I'm a partner with Griffin Investors, as you guys can see behind me. We're a middle market private equity fund based out here in San Francisco. I started my career in the early 90s in investment banking, and then went to work for a smaller consumer-focused private equity fund based in Connecticut. But I've been with Griffin now for 18 years. I'm a partner, and for the last dozen years, I've led our consumer effort. And I'll tell you a little bit more about Griffin. We've been around since the mid 90s. We manage over $4 billion of capital, and we look for good established middle market businesses across 5 industry groups. Consumer being only one of the 5, but also services, industrial, healthcare, and software. And our strategy is to work alongside really talented operators and executives like Tiffany and Todd, and lock arms with them to find businesses that meet investment thesis criteria in sectors that we know we want to own businesses in, and then build those businesses into what we call enduring businesses, which means some kind of a leadership position in their segment or niche, which well beyond our ownership period, we know are going to endure and thrive for a long time. And the way we try to enable those businesses to thrive is to really professionalize the management team and resource against all the areas that we think that business can grow and win in. So within consumer, we've really built our track record over the last 15 years or so, focused on consumer packaged goods, and that's across food, consumer health, personal care, beauty, and we also love investing in and building up what we call enthusiast brands. So in that case, the product doesn't really matter, but if the product type doesn't really matter, but if the brand has a really strong equity that we think is being under optimized, we get excited about that. I think you asked about what we love about our job. What I love is pretty simple. It's the people side of the business. I'm pretty lucky that I get to every single week meet really talented business owners and entrepreneurs and executives, again, like Todd and Tiffany, and work with them and figure out the right human capital recipe, if you will, to lead a business and grow a business. And that's the fun part to me. It's the human capital dynamics of what we do.
So we're going to come back because I want to finish our introductions and talk about the human capital piece. It's something that all of you have talked about, and I think the folks on the webinar would love to hear the kind of things that make you feel like this is someone you'd want to lock arms with, and also enthusiast brands. So we'll come back to those two things. I'm going to ask Tiffany, who is in a different role and in an operating role today, to talk about what she's doing, where she is, and also you have some other great background. So please share that too.
Yeah, absolutely, Lisa. Thank you for having me. Hello to everyone out there. And actually, I want to go back to something that you posed a minute ago, which is curiosity. So right now, I work for Bayer, and I lead the accelerator group that we started off in January of 2019. And basically what that means is I lead curiosity, because it's all about thinking about the consumer and where the consumer is going and how that's evolving over time. And so if I look back in my career, it's kind of built up to this point. So I started, it's almost a mirror image of Todd. I spent about 15 years at Wyeth/Pfizer, the portfolio that's now part of GSK, primarily in marketing roles, but I did switch over to sales a bit here and there, and really, started to build a passion around the consumer and an understanding around the consumer, and loved getting into that psychology. And then from there, I went over to Reckitt Benckiser and led the cough cold portfolio, where I learned a lot about how do you operationalize and execute those insights rapidly. And I did that for healthcare, and then did that for air care, which was really different for me to move outside of health, and ran that portfolio for the US, and then innovation and communication for Europe and North America. And then went to Fleet and had the opportunity to work with Todd and Keith. And it was all about how do you take an organization that has some of the right pieces and really operationalize how you can bring that consumer understanding to market quickly and build a pipeline. And that was something that we did together. And that, when we exited there, that's when I came to Bayer. I had a sales role and now the accelerator. So consumer curiosity has kind of driven me every step of the way.
I'm kind of jealous. I can't imagine a job where leading curiosity is my primary goal. That's not actually true at Luminations. We get to do a lot of that with our clients and partners. And I feel like that's something that we need to nurture in people who are starting out, that curiosity, the asking questions, and the making sure they pull the thread. They don't just let something go because that's the historic norm or the way we always did things. So we'll talk more about that too if we have time. I'm going to come to Gary and ask Gary to introduce himself. Then we're going to throw up the poll on the site so folks can tell us who they are. And then we have a couple specific questions, but I already have a list of 10 new ones based on your introduction. So Gary, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Lisa, and thank you to the co-panelists. This is a really exciting opportunity to be in front of this group and sharing our backgrounds and our experience. So on that front, I'm a managing director at Accordion Partners. Accordion is a private equity focused financial consulting firm, really targeted and specializing in for me, in our transaction execution services practice, which in the private equity world is very much about parachuting in after deal formulation is pretty much down the line. And there's a high likelihood that the transaction is going to move forward. And we focus on, from an execution perspective, carve-outs, integrations. I think we heard Todd mention add-ons and platforms and tuck-ins. So, you know, all of that, how we think about, help our clients think about best ways to integrate, to carve out through the integration management office or the separation management office. Lisa had mentioned communication, change management. And when we put together the integration management office, we kind of look at the that including, or you know, that layer of management, the IMO, including both synergies and achievement, both growth and rationalization on one side, and the human capital, which we talked about, in the HR and the change management piece on the other. The transactions impact, you know, certainly impact people. So it's a very important aspect that we help focus on. Being in a human capital business myself now at Accordion gives a certain, very much a strong appreciation for that. Prior to that, I was at Johnson & Johnson Consumer doing M&A work, heavy transaction execution, as well as the strategy and full cycle M&A. But probably one of my most favorite projects was the acquisition of the Pfizer consumer healthcare business, where Robin and I first crossed paths, her on the sell side, me on the buy side. But I ran the global transition services for J&J's integration of that acquisition, which was an incredibly educational, fun, and learning opportunity. And really just understanding best practices around transition services and the integration management office and the separation management office. What we've really gravitated to as calling the TMO, the transition management office, because it really doesn't matter which side you're on. But so that's really where we focus at Accordion. But doing the leading, you know, asset and stock deals at J&J, which have, you know, their own differences, from a legal perspective, from an operating perspective, the integrations and the carve-outs. The largest deal I did was the Pfizer deal. It was a $16 billion acquisition at the time. And while that may actually seem like a small number, that was back in 2006. Mm-hmm. So when you think about it.
Doesn't seem small to me.
So.
And there was and still is a lot happening there. So
that there is. And the other piece of that was incredibly valuable, was doing a true global deal. It touched 90 countries, and continuing at J&J, doing additional deals in EMEA, in Russia, in China, in Brazil, really helped round out and give a tremendous flavor around the culture piece of it, which is so important in today's day and age, and really the different regulatory requirements that exist in different geographies, on a country by country level, especially on regulated products. But there are people regulatory aspects, there are product regulatory aspects, there are EH&S regulatory aspects, which environmental health and safety. Now it's actually new. As things continue to evolve, we now refer to it as EHS&S within Accordion, because the security piece has been added to that. Mm-hmm. So it's now environmental health, safety, and security. So just helping private equity deliver on their value drivers, their through flawless execution. They help make sure they achieve their investment thesis. And we do a lot of that through providing influential leadership as a consulting firm. At the end of the day, it is the owner, the buyers, the client's decision, but they look heavily towards us on past experience and influencing their decisions. So what helps tremendously is having been on the other side of the seat, the other side of the table, having been in industry, really brings a different lens to our clients than many of other consulting firms out there who've just been, born and bred consultants.
I agree. I think having the industry, and in fact, many of us on the panel have been on both the operating and the investing side, and I think it does make a difference. We bring a different perspective. You said something that we'll come back to in a little while too. You said that it was fun being in deal flow in the transaction, and I'm not sure if we would say that when we're right in the middle of it, but looking back, we usually say that. So I'm going to ask, because this is a rough time in society right now, for people to think about what is fun about being in the business development, acquisition, or divestiture business. Can you give us an example of something recently that you really enjoyed, something positive and optimistic that you've been working on? And then we'll go to the poll. Anybody have a fun example, something optimistic, positive, good news that you could share? Okay, nobody's raising their hand.
I'll give you a piece of good news. When we were divesting the diabetes businesses at J&J, we always talk about LifeScan, but there were several other businesses involved also. And one of them was a startup. It was a product we had not gotten to market. It was a real advancement for patients. It's a 3-day insulin patch. And we did a deal with a startup company. I said to the chairman of J&J, what does success look like on this deal? And he said, getting this product to patients. So we structured a deal designed to get the product to patients. And I am really excited that the first box shipped last week.
Oh, yay. That's excellent. I'm happy to hear that. And also, we talk a lot about regulatory changes, and it feels to me, we could do a whole session just on the changing regulatory environment, but it feels to me like things have loosened up to allow new technologies and things that are important for patients and in healthcare to be more accessible faster. And to me, that's something that gets me excited. Bria, oh yes, Keith.
I'll share a quick positive anecdote. We own a business, a really cool workwear brand, glove brand called Mechanics Wear. And it's a personal protective equipment product. So it was deemed an essential business when the COVID craziness started. So the business is actually doing quite well in this environment. But the positive anecdote is we've been providing our gloves to first responders, as well as doing some really co-promotions with some of the big do-it-yourself retailers to get the gloves to veterans as well.
Oh,
so
that's also
it's one
excellent.
of those really neat brands that we're lucky to be involved with, and can do a lot of good in this craziness.
Thanks. Okay, Gary, I'm gonna do the poll and then we'll come back to you.
Okay.
Brielle, can you put up our poll? I just want to make sure you all can see who's on today. Tell us who you are. Give it 30 more seconds, and then Brielle, if you could show us the responses. You only get to pick one. You might be more than one. Just pick the closest. Panelists, you can vote, I think. All right, let's take a look at the results. Okay, wow, really nice mix of marketers, C-suite, investors, and some of us students and professors and other. Wow, I wish I would have asked for an open end on other to find out who they are, but we'll keep going. We have a second question. What are you interested in hearing from us in the little bit of time we have left? What's on your mind? And you can check more than one here, all that apply. Oops, there's a little typo, but excuse us. It's only letting me select one, so I lied. I think you can only select the most important. Okay. Submit your votes. And let's see what this looks like. Okay, there's a lot of interest in uncovering undervalued businesses, sustaining business success or growth, job security, not a surprise, right? And enhancing my portfolio. Now, it's not high up there, personal or family health and safety, and that's probably because we didn't let you vote for more than one. I'm pretty sure that's on everybody's mind. And if you could have voted for more than one, job security is probably on everybody's mind too, which is why I love these experts to tell us a little bit about what they look for in the best people, because we should always be thinking about what's happening next. Gary, you said you had a positive example you wanted to share quickly, and then I want to get into our question.
I'll go quickly. So it was actually on two. One was actually getting a deal closed for an inhalation drug delivery business that was carved out from a Global 100 that closed May 1st, and we were on an accelerated timeline, and getting a deal closed in a remote world was very interesting. But what also was interesting is the learning, and Keith had mentioned about PPE and things like that, where we are seeing some benefit. There were actually drones that were used for plant diligence in terms of being able to go around and look at the site and so forth. So I think that the technology and the technological advancements that are going to continue, especially coming out of a new world that we're going to be living in, is just a lot to be very optimistic around. I think we're going to see a lot of ways of doing things better, different, more creatively, and improve technology as a result of it. So, listen, who would have thought we'd be on 50 to 100 person Zoom call,
Right?
And, and the other thing is some optimism and good news. We talked earlier, Lisa, about the market. I mean, the market is generally a forward-looking indicator, and yet it continues to be strong in spite of record unemployment and so forth. So there is a lot of optimism out in the world, and I figured I would just share those points building on it and turn it back to you.
Thanks, Gary. Those of you who know me know I always like to take the optimistic, although pragmatic outlook, and I think that's really important to share. So you mentioned that a deal closed in May. Do others of you have deals that have closed recently? I know, Robin, you said, some countries were closing post-quarantine. And what are you seeing in terms of general movement in transactions right now? Is it still happening? Slower, faster, different? Pierre?
Yeah, certainly the typical auction processes have slowed down because companies are trying to figure out what to present in the case of a lot of uncertainties for their existing markets. But we tend to work on long-term relationship building with entrepreneur owners, founders, family businesses. So these are long-term. And one thing I would like to bring out, I probably call it the black swan effect. A lot of people who are, I'm going to sell my business next year because, I have this product coming out and it's going to be phenomenal. I'm going to sell it for a lot more money. People realized all their lives they built all their equity into a business, and they're looking for a partner and exit. And suddenly they never expected the world to change overnight. And suddenly they're more motivated to diversify their risk financially. So we see probably entrepreneurs who were on the line to consider making a transaction to bring a partner. From an auction perspective, obviously there are people who started before, and those are still going on, and we see many of those happening. There's challenges. I think it was mentioned about we've also done some of these drone due diligence visits of manufacturing facilities. So there's ways to go around this, but this is a temporary situation. Deals are going to get done. I think there's cash available, low debt, low interest rates. That's going to continue for a while. And I think this bodes well. I think it's going to create new business opportunities, and I see the deal flow accelerating later this year. Obviously, broad-based processes have slowed down, but proprietary type discussions are going on.
Great. Anybody want to add to that, your experiences with what's happening in the marketplace today? Raise your hand if you do. Yeah, Robin?
We did close 2 countries shut down for COVID-19, and that made it a little tougher. We couldn't move inventory. Platinum Equity usually had an HR team that they flew in to handle the employees, and we couldn't do that. They had to do that virtually. But I think the reason we were able to close was going back to something that Pierre said, is we work on long-term deals, and the closings for these 2 countries were months in preparation, and the plans were so solid that despite all the challenges put up by COVID-19, we were able to proceed and proceed successfully.
So those relationships matter more than ever, I'm hearing. And if we're on the corporate side, Tiffany, for instance, how do we forge those relationships? What do we do as business leaders to make sure that we're networked with the right people to see opportunities?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, because it's interesting because quite honestly, you know, a lot of those businesses look to private equity sometimes, and some look to corporate. But I think, you know, for us, I think the most important thing is we really try and understand the consumer and where the consumer is going and let that guide us, right? So then, you know, you find the path to where you want to build those relationships by understanding where the consumer is drawn. And even at times like this, right, we've seen significant change, which is kind of the story of the last few years, right? Change just keeps accelerating and accelerating and accelerating. And to Todd's earlier point, agility becomes such a critical thing. But with all that change is always new opportunities, right? The consumer is always gravitating to new spots. It's always evolving to, you know, to where there's new consumer benefits, consumer needs. And if you follow that and then build the relationships based on where the consumer is taking you, it all comes together really nicely.
Thanks. We talked a little bit about the ever-changing market and the need for agility and innovating faster. When you all look at companies or brands, do you evaluate them partly based on how quickly they innovate and respond to changing consumer needs? And what else do you look at as key indicators of success, metrics for success on brands and business? And adding to that, has any of this changed recently? Anybody want to take that? Top 3 things. Thanks, Todd. Unmute us, Todd.
I always do my best stuff on mute, so the second time around might not be as good. I think the most important thing is that when you are looking at businesses and brands, it's, to Tiffany's point, it's understanding the consumer and it's understanding where you can take the brand. And where that inside of that brand target, where can you stretch it to? That's the most important thing. And then I think, you know, after that is having the people with the capability that can actually grow the brand and have the right approach to growing it sustainably. I think there's a fork in the road when you talk about innovation that you have to really come to grips. Is it a product upgrade or is it really innovation? And a lot of times we find ourselves at that crossroad that a product upgrade becomes an innovation and it's not a sustainable growth opportunity. It's a short-term kind of jolt for the business that you end up having to anniversary. So I think really understanding where the consumer is, where the brand can go, and more importantly, making sure that these are longer term, the growth will stay there, it's sustainable. And that's the one thing, having the agility in private equity is important, but I think the focus for all of, you know, the private equity firms I've had the opportunity to work with or meet is just really finding ways that growth is sustainable. And that's most important.
What questions do you ask? And Keith, I'm going to come to you and ask you this same thing and talk a little bit about brand enthusiasts. What kind of questions should we be thinking about as we want to make sure either internally or externally we're nurturing this sustainable growth? And you mentioned the quick pop and the long-term sustainable growth. do we still need a little bit of both?
I personally believe you can do and achieve both. I don't think one comes at the expense of doing the other. I think any full growth plan has a short-term portion to it of household penetration and all those type of metrics that you have when you're driving a brand. But I also think the ability to extend it longer term. And so it really is bringing the type of experts in that can really dissect what the consumer's saying, what they're open to and what they're not open to, and letting that drive your decision making as far as how wide you can stretch the brand and where you can stretch the brand.
Okay, I'm going to go to Keith, and then Tiffany or Robin, I might come back to you, because I think in addition to drone technology, the way in which we can understand consumers, ask them questions, and quickly interpret that to get to this sustainable growth, that technology is changing too. And I'm curious if you're seeing anything new we should be thinking about that you can share. Keith.
So sorry, so what's the question now?
Oh, the question was initially,
Okay.
what are the indicators for sustainable growth that you look for? And do you think we need a little bit of short-term and long-term to make a business viable in terms of growth? And if you've identified any technologies or opportunities to understand the consumer better, because I think now the pressure's on us to understand them better, stronger, faster. What are you seeing?
Well, I'm going to riff off of what Todd said, and he said it better, and that's why he did such a good job with Tiffany in growing our fleet business back when they were running that business. But it's all about the brand for us and the way, you know, we assess a brand. Maybe this is riffing off of Tiffany. It starts with the consumer, and you know, we, as part of our strategy, have an internal operations group, and luckily within that group, it's consisting of a bunch of former branded consumer executives who have grown multiple brands in the past. So we use a lot of consumer research. We look for differentiation. And you know, the strength of the brand and the differentiation are keys to us to get comfortable that the growth in the business is not only sustainable, but we can accelerate it and also introduce new product development and innovation. It starts with the brand. If the brand's strong enough, we really don't mind if the company, when we invest in it, doesn't have the capabilities to innovate or introduce new products. We're happy investing in those capabilities if the brand is strong enough. And then I guess the final thing I would mention, you asked about new technologies or techniques to really understand the consumer. It's this, it's the internet, it's social media. The ability to socially listen and scrape all the big social media sites and to look at the Amazon reviews and simple things like Google search words. You can learn a lot about a brand pretty quickly versus 10 years ago.
Yeah, and it's free. I said I would go to Tiffany. I saw your note, Gary, and I see your hand, Pierre. So Tiffany, did you want to add anything to how we're identifying what's really meaningful to the consumer? Then I'm going to go to Pierre and Gary, and then I want to get to the people portion of this before we have to end our webinar.
Yeah, just two quick thoughts. I mean, completely agree with what Keith said, right? The social media and the reviews, and quite honestly, I think sometimes we forget that we're consumers. And you know, so spend some time on Instagram, spend some time on TikTok, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
And just lose yourself in it for a little while and see what's out there. And then I would say the other thing is, so much of the technology today lends itself to giving you a different insight into the consumer. And I'll use a fleet example, right? So sorry for the lunchtime conversation, but fleet enemas is not something that people were super comfortable talking about face to face. Yet they would be more than happy to talk to themselves in their cell phone and talk about that experience. So the ability to learn something different about the consumers just based on the technology and the privacy that that provides, and having that almost conversation with themselves is really interesting.
Thank you, Tiffany. Pierre, then Gary.
Yeah,
And
I
then
just want to
Rob.
add an aspect. Obviously, you can pump up products with a lot of great marketing and social media, influencers, all these techniques that everybody is using. But fundamentally, you know, and this is my background in the pharma side, the product has to work. The product has to have the right ingredients. They have to have, you know, limited or no side effect. It really has to perform clinically. And I think, you know, one way to grow sustainable business, to have the best formulations, to have the best product, the best delivery system, and fundamentally something that when people use it, they see results and it meets their expectation or even beats their expectations. So at the end of the day, you always have to go back to the science part of this thing, the, you know, efficacy of the product, the safety profile, and something that produces sustainable results if you want to have a sustainable brand. And then you can build brand equity long-term, as opposed to just a flash in the pan driven by strictly a marketing strategy.
So sustainable growth has to do not just with what people are feeling and thinking, but that the product actually or service delivers what it promises. And I think in 2020, when people are feeling very uncertain, that matters more than ever, that we have to do what we say we're going to do, or they're going to move on to the next thing. Can't afford to make risky choices and want to know that it's going to deliver what we promise. Gary, then Robin.
Yeah, so real quick. So as Keith and Tiffany were mentioning around the data piece of this, what we're seeing clients ask us a lot in our strategic finance team is to really mine that data. Tools like Power Pivot, Power BI, Tableau, where we're actually going in and crawling into their data and coming up and being able to let the data be demonstrative of what's really happening. And a lot of the, I'll call it, you know, as Keith was talking about, what's out there on, you know, in the public domain from a consumer perspective, but also from a factual perspective in terms of what is actually happening in the business through the through these powered data reporting tools that are providing historical information, but is done out into, I'll call it a forward-looking lens. And also taking a look at getting perspectives of what is going to be out there in the future and incorporating that in as well. So we're seeing the data analytics side of this just be tremendously powerful.
I think that's a really important point. There's more data available and there are better tools to get your arms around it faster. And in fact, working on, this is later today, what's the future of an MBA? Data analytics has to be an increasing part of any marketers or senior managers' understanding. I agree. Robin, and then I saw in the Q&A some questions about leadership. So I'm going to ask you all to think about, what do you look for? Some of you talked about jobs after leaving brand companies, coming to work for you and parachuting into portfolio companies. What are the kind of things that people who are listening today who would aspire to that should be developing in their portfolio of skills and should be demonstrating? Because I think that's like a dream job for a lot of marketers who are probably on the webinar today. Robin.
Consumer focus is critical, and I want to take you to an example where we were so focused on delivery that we forgot about the consumer. And it's a very relevant example because it was during the H1N1 crisis with Purell. The H1N1 crisis lasted 19 months. It wasn't as deadly as this crisis, but it's very relevant. Demand for Purell was astronomical, just like it is today. And our supply chain we had limited components. We couldn't get pumps, so we had to make 8-ounce bottles with caps. You're seeing similar trade-offs today. Eventually, supply caught up with demand. And when the crisis was over, the channels and the pantries were so overstocked that we didn't sell another bottle of Purell for almost a year. This was not good for the brand. We were so focused on delivery, we forgot about the consumer. So what I say to all of you who are in brands that are doing well today, you need to take a step back and you need to say, what do we need to do to delight these consumers so we can retain them after the crisis?
Robin, having been a part of the divestiture of Purell, which was a little heartbreaking after we saw that kind of demand, and now seeing what's happening, anything you would have told the brand or business people specifically in the heat of the moment to do differently? Because some of us are managing businesses right now in the heat of the moment.
I think when you're in the heat of the moment, which is the way we were, our number one priority was to get supply, which is what you're seeing today with toilet paper and with other products. What I would tell people is don't short circuit the marketing. You need to focus on the customer and you need to focus on the marketing. There are brands that are doing well now that may not do well after the crisis. There are other brands that are doing poorly that need to get resurrected and need strategies on how to come out of the crisis strong. So every brand, wherever it is, whether it's, I think it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good are the brands like Purell. The bad grooming products are kind of weak. And the ugly are hotels and airlines. So selling cheap hotel seats, cheap rooms and cheap seats is not the answer. The answer is what's the strategy coming out of the crisis, and when do you implement it? Because timing is everything.
That's a really good point, I think, for all of us to think about, because we do get lost in the heat of the moment. And we are struggling through managing businesses many times now with little ones being homeschooled. So there's extra pressure. But I'm really glad we're recording so I can quote you on don't forget the marketing, because we say that a lot to businesses and sometimes it falls by the wayside. So I want to turn to leadership qualities. As I said, I haven't gotten to cover nearly the list of questions that I wanted to, but this is something that our audience is asking us to talk about. And I know you all are extremely involved in picking the right people, maybe even over picking the business. So what are a couple pointers for people who are listening in today that they should be thinking about if they wanted to capture your attention or imagination? We'll start with Todd.
Yeah, so one of the things I use is an acronym called TEAM, T-E-A-M. Obviously, being in this private equity space and being in a role that is focused on driving growth, you have to work as a team efficiently and effectively. But it stands for T, building trust. Can you as a person build trust with your teammates? Can you build trust with the consumer? Can you build trust with those that are around you? Because especially in the world that we're at, if you don't have trust in any relationship, you really don't have anything. So the second piece is the willingness or demonstrating empowerment, the ability to empower you, your teammates, whether you're a leader or you're a person that works under a leader. Being empowered and self-starting is important. The A stands for accountability. Do you like being accountable for things? Will you take accountability? Will you deliver against it? And the M has evolved a bit, but it's more around multitask. You have to be able to, in a condensed organization that's not so vertical, you have to be able to play across the enterprise and get your hands dirty on many different levels. So I try to keep things simple so I can remember them, but I look at TEAM because I love with being on a team, but I love what each of the separate pieces stands for. And so that's how I assess people, and that's how I look at past performances of people.
Anybody want to add to that? I think, Pierre, you had your hand up, yeah?
Yeah, I think we're looking for people and leaders that are strongly based on a values system. They have strong values, not just value statement, but they live the values. And I'll tell you, through the course of this crisis, talking to the CEOs, when you have, a crisis of the magnitude we have with supply chain, a health risk, and business disruption, I think the business leaders that perform well and teams that perform well, they went back to their basic values and they focus on the right thing. They focus on the customer, the consumer, It focused on the employee health and safety. And then they made the difficult trade-offs. And sometimes this was a financial impact, but they were driven by the values to make decisions. So the drive, the values around sustainability, ethics, social, caring for social connection, community focus. So these strong values are the basis. And I think people that have a behavior in acting in teams or leading teams or, contributors, but that share those values, I think is the thing that guides you in difficult times and also allow you to stay on track in things when things are booming.
We hear a lot about people actually proactively seeking companies that demonstrate the kind of values that they want to be a part of. So are you at all changing what you look for in companies beyond just the sustainable products or services or that brand, that enthusiast brand? Are values changing or becoming more prominent in what you look for? Or has this always been the case? Todd's saying it's always been the case.
It has always been the case, and in private equity, we team up a lot of entrepreneurs and founders. And when we have common values on how we look at the market, the products, the innovation, how we take care of the teams, the people, incentives, we find that when those values are well aligned, they're always very successful. We can bring the value adds, but the basis, the culture of the enterprise, the culture of the teams is such that, it really drives excellence and performance. And, if you start with the wrong value alignment, it gets very difficult.
Can I just hold on that a second, Lisa? I think it's important to know that, as we look, a lot of the businesses that we've owned, our first introduction was 3 to 4 years prior to the acquisition. It was the understanding of the values that they had and where they really enmesh with our values. Just to build on Pierre's point, we spend a lot of time that way getting to know businesses and making sure they're a right fit and people.
Okay, good. Keith wanted to talk. I think I saw Robin's hand up, and then we have only a couple minutes, so I want to make sure I ask you, is there anything you think I should have asked that I didn't? Keith, go ahead.
I'll be quick and continue to bore the audience with the private equity lens. And
no, we're here because of that lens.
Okay. Well, two things that we look for, or that in our experience have really been key tenets of executives who have been successful with the private equity brands. One is action-oriented. And Todd kind of mentioned this, but we in private equity have a finite hold period. So we want to get at the value creation and the growth as soon as possible. So leaders who are able to think strategically but take action are critical. And then the second thing is what we call the ability to go high and low. And Todd and Tiffany are perfect examples of this, given their careers in the big pharma world. They've been able to now come into private equity and prove what great leaders they are, because they're not only able to think broadly and strategically, but they're able to really roll up their sleeves and get down into the detail to drive initiatives and drive the growth of a business. So that ability to keep going high and low is critical, and not everybody has that capability.
How do you identify that? Do you look at their past track record? What shows you that someone can be strategic, 30,000 feet up, and tactical, get their hands dirty?
And that would be giving away our secret sauce, Lisa.
Okay. I told you guys
just joking. It's actually really hard to figure out. It's experience.
Okay.
For a long time, gray hair.
Thank you. Not that any of us have it, right? Robin.
So J&J is a company with strong values. I think you all know that. It's well known for the values. When we were divesting LifeScan, we asked the management team of LifeScan what they wanted, and they wanted a company that shared our values. And we did interview all the buyers to see that we were compatible on the values. That was a very important criteria. So I do agree with everything that what you've said about the values. With that said, when I reflect on the strong leaders that I've worked with, they come from every major, every geography, every diversity category. And companies really don't hire skills. They hire people who know how to use the skills and who know how to learn. So my message to the students who may be on this call, or the job seekers, is seek a company that's committed to professional development and diversity and gives you the opportunity to grow.
That's great advice. And we are going to be finishing up because we're at the end of our hour together. And I think I got to 2 of the questions that I wanted to cover. So I might invite you all back from a round 2. Gary's making sure that we add agility and flexibility to leadership skills, which I think we started with that. And so it's good to end with that. On the training piece, part of why I love doing these webinars is I learn, and I hope we're sharing our training and our expertise with other people. So as I said, I might invite you guys back to do a round 2. Keep thinking quarantine's going to end and our quarantine series going to end, but maybe we'll do another webinar. So for those of you out there who have suggestions for us on what you want to learn about and talk about and with whom, send them my way. And for students, we do have a free externship training coming up on July 16th for anybody, interns, students, recent grads, job seekers who want to join. Just send an email and we'll get you the details on that. Thank you all. Really, I cannot tell you again how grateful I am to be able to bounce these questions and ideas off of you and have an hour of your time. And I look forward to staying in touch with everybody out there and everybody here. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.